Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Digging Deeper Moment 211. The purpose of our Digging Deeper Moments is to take God's Word to God's world, and we're so glad that you've joined us. And hey, if you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please take a moment to do that. Thank you. Tonight, we conclude our series, The Seven Feasts of Israel, with two thoughts. Next week, we'll begin a new series, The Seven Feasts as they appear in the New Testament. So we'll transition to the New Testament. Of the seven feasts, 3 of them were mandatory for Jewish men, for all Jewish men. These are called the Pilgrim Feasts because the men were required to travel to the tabernacle and later to the temple 3 times a year. Deuteronomy 16:16 through 17 state, 3 times a year all your males shall appear before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses, at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Tabernacles. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given you. This tells us that all men had to travel to the tabernacle or temple 3 times a year for Passover, Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. That they were not to come without a gift of gratitude. In other words, they weren't giving what they didn't have. They weren't making a promise. They were giving of what they'd already received. And they were to give according to their ability, according to how they were blessed, not according to how others gave, because this was a gift of gratitude. So when we look at the 7 feasts, we have to distinguish between the 3 pilgrims feasts and from the other 4 feasts because they weren't mandated as the 3 were. The other 3, they had to go to Jerusalem, but these other 4, they didn't have to go to Jerusalem or the temple. But before we move on in our studies, there's one final thought that needs to be conveyed, and that is the idea of holidays. You know, holidays are part of a nation's culture. A nation celebrates them because they celebrate what's important to that nation. Therefore, they communicate, these holidays communicate a nation's values. Our federal government has authorized 12 national holidays by giving government employees a day off. There's New Year's Day, Martin Luther King Jr., his birthday, Washington's birthday, Memorial Day, Juneteenth, National Independence Day. We have Independence Day, we have Labor Day, Columbus Day, Veterans Day, Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, and the 12th in an election year is Inauguration Day, which is January 20th. Today, when we hear the word holiday, our minds immediately think of a day off. But that's not what the ancient world would have thought, or that's not what ancient Israel would have thought. Our word holiday comes from an Old English word meaning holy days. And this stems from Israel's holy days found in the Bible, in Leviticus and the other books of the Bible, meaning they're different, they're set apart. Along with Israel's 7 feasts, they also had 7 holidays or holy days. Now these holidays were connected to the 7 feasts, but not exclusive to them. And the Bible calls these holy days Sabbaths. By now, you may have already noticed that the Bible is fond of the number 7. There were 7 feasts, 7 holidays, 7 days in the week. And I was doing some study this morning. There's 7 is all over Genesis chapter 1, not just the 7 days. There's certain words are used 7 times or a combination of 7, like 7 times 5, which is 35. The name God is used 35 times in the book of Genesis chapter 1. So 7 is a very biblical number. Now, the reason that the Bible uses the number 7 a lot is that God wanted Israel to connect what they were doing with the 7 days of creation. Just as God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th, Israel was to work 6 days and rest on the 7th. The day of rest was meant to renew Israel's strength so that they could engage again in work. That is the act of creation. That's what work is. It's the act of creation. And each week we were to celebrate and reflect on and be part of creation just as God created the universe. Likewise, the 7 feasts were also connected to creation. The reason there's 7 is it's new creation. God is reminding Israel and taking them back to Genesis chapter 1. This reminded Israel of the one who created all things. And it reminds them of who gave them the ability to work and create as well as to rest. So these festivals reinforce the truth that without God, none of their blessings would take place. That our work is in vain without God's blessing. Without God's provision, our crops won't grow, our barns won't be full, and our bank accounts won't have any money in them, in other words. So the 7 holidays or 7 holy days are also connected to the creation week. There's 7 of them that remind of the number 7 to connect it to the creation week. And these holidays or holy days also serve to reinforce the fact that Israel didn't need to work 24/7, 365 days a year to make ends meet. God would provide what they needed in 6 days, what it usually takes 7 days to produce, and in doing so, He would give them a day off. Next week, we'll begin to look at a new series, the 7 Feasts in the New Testament. And this series will help us to connect the dots between the Old Testament and the New Testament and give us a complete understanding, or a more complete understanding, of the New Testament and the work of Jesus Christ. If this lesson's helped you, please share it with a friend. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or check out our Sunday morning live podcast on either app or Spotify. And hey, if you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, why don't you stop and do that? You'll be a great help to us. Thank you. I hope to see you next week.